welcome back to the show. Today, my guest is Ires Wilbanks, and she is a doula and prenatal yoga instructor. So, welcome to the show, Ires.
Thank you, JT. So good to be here.
Happy to have you on the show. This is a timely and informative interview for myself personally, maybe selfishly. My wife is pregnant. We were just talking before that she's about 11, between 10 and 11 weeks till our due date. So coming into crunch time, this is our first child. So interested, obviously, in your expertise and perspective on these things and topics. So thank you for coming on. And maybe we could talk about kind of how we first met. So I was going through yoga teacher certification, and you presented and taught a prenatal class. So maybe we can kind of start there and talk the types of things that you educate on as far as prenatal and yoga and how that kind of helps in the process.
Thank you. It is such an exciting time for you, JT. It's a time of transition. You're really on the cusp, and I feel like transitions in our society need some ceremony. And unfortunately, I don't think we have enough of that. So I want to celebrate you and Brittany as you sit on the cusp of a very big life change. And I think that part of why we connected so well, maybe, I'm not sure, but when you were in class, I think this was on your mind. This was definitely on, like, in your consciousness, right? This idea of becoming a parent, but also looking at things perhaps differently than the way we view this in our predominant culture, right? Like zooming out and saying, what are the bigger spiritual forces here? Not just, it's a normal everyday thing, but actually it's quite extraordinary, right? Becoming a parent, having a child, the miracle of life, the growing your child and doing this together, you and Brittany on this journey together, it's profound. It is extraordinary, and life is going to change, but maybe we just don't know how it's going to change, right? Because there's a lot of mystery in that. And I think one thing that as working with my students and my clients over the years, is imparting this notion of embracing the mystery, embracing that there are things that we can certainly intellectualize. And then there are things that are beyond that, that are beyond explanation, that are beyond everyday thinking, that we can just think our way through this. Like, we can't necessarily.
Right. Yeah, I think subconsciously or in the back of my mind, I knew I wanted to be a parent when I was going through that yoga class, describing this very spiritual, magical process. The mystery of life itself is something that I contemplated pretty much my whole life. Why are we here and all these things? And then with the birthing and creating new life, obviously it's a continuation and brings back to the surface a lot of those initial questions of the magic of the existence of human beings and life itself. So I think it's something that does seem to me to get lost in the everyday conversations that you have with family and friends around, my wife is pregnant, Brittany's doing well, this, that, and the other. And it seems all very surface level, and it's kind of difficult to almost break that fourth wall of, wow, what is really going on here? What do we really think about it? And having traditions, the yoga philosophy and lineage goes back thousands of years, and being in the mindset of that, going through the teacher training and thinking of these different cultures and different lineages that have been around for so long, got me thinking, how did cultures do this before hospitals existed? How did birthing happen in these communities, like way from caveman days all the way through agricultural revolution? It's like, we're all still here. So it must have been successful to a certain extent without all these different machines and different procedures and chemicals that we've introduced. So maybe you could kind of start there and your perspective on what were the practices then, and then what kind of path that's taken over time.
Yeah, I think that was something, when we did the training, I talked about mammalian birth, right? And looking back thousands of years past. And I, I've been teaching my prenatal yoga class and my labor delivery class for it's been like 14 years. And every time I teach the labor and delivery class, it's always so different. It's always so interesting because of the people, right? Who comes, like the students that show up, and
Right.
what they bring to the table, which I love. So I love that. I love that, the interaction, and always start with asking, like, do you know the story of your own birth? Do you know anything about, what do you know? Do you know anything about how your mother was born or your grandmother was born or your great grandmother was born? And it's interesting to start the conversation that way because you're going to get a lot of varied answers. Yeah, I mean, now where we are, right in the United States, we have about 4 million babies born a year, more or less. And the vast majority of babies that are being born in hospital. And the vast majority of them, the mothers have had some type of medical intervention. And you're looking at varying rates of cesarean birth by hospital, right? Some hospitals have higher rates than others, but on average, 31 to 33%. And that's a national average. So you really could go hospital by hospital. You can look it up. The numbers are available. And some hospitals have much higher rates of surgical birth. There's a hospital in Texas. And I don't know this hospital. It's just something I looked up because the data is available that had like a 90% cesarean rate. Is that normal? Are women really incapable of giving birth the way their nature intended? No, definitely not. That's not normal. There's definitely something else going on. And we can definitely look at rates all across the world and outcomes. And this is the age of the internet. You can look anything up. So you can look this up and see what are the outcomes. We rank lowest in all of the industrialized nations in terms of outcomes for mothers and babies. So
Mhm.
there's something there. Why are we spending the most money on maternal health and not having, good outcomes? Scandinavian countries do have the best outcomes for mothers and babies. And I think it has to go back to the culture. And some places have very low rates of cesarean section. I'm particularly curious and interested in this kind of thing. I look into these stats because I want to know why, why
Right.
are people asking that question? Like, okay, you'll say XYZ. Okay, but why XYZ? Why is it? Last night I looked up, I was just curious. Burkina Faso, it's like one of the poorest countries in Africa. They have a 3% C-section rate. That's very low. Do they have in terms of maternal mortality? I'm not sure exactly where they rank. South Sudan is like the lowest for maternal mortality, but you've got to figure they've been in conflict and war and what is available. So the World Health Organization indicates that we should strive for anywhere between 10 and 15% for a cesarean rate. But if you look at individual statistics, say a particular midwife or a birth center, and there even now there are, I know of several studies that are being conducted in the community of the free birthing women. So there's nothing out there yet, but I know that there are studies happening among women who choose unassisted birth, which is basically birth without a medical provider.
Mm.
What are those outcomes, for mothers and babies? And they can vary from anywhere for like a less than 1% intervention rate to 11 or 20%. So it's obviously much lower than 33%. So just to give you a little bit of context in terms of why I care about this so much, it goes back to my own personal story and my history and becoming a mother for the first time, which happened 21 years ago. And I do have two children, and my eldest is 21 and my youngest is about to turn 18. And I was not in the birth world, not even tangentially, when I was pregnant with my first. I worked in the news business and I had a very busy life in New York City. And I was very excited to become a mother. I wanted to become a mother, even in my late 20s. I really thought about starting a family with my husband, and we were really excited to have a baby. I did not do extensive research on what my choices were in terms of care. And I think my consciousness around birth was, what are the stories you know? What are the stories you grow up with? I didn't
Mhm.
really think about it too much. I just thought birth is normal. It's something women do, have done for eons. And I'm healthy. I take good care of myself. I love to be super active and do challenging physical things, right? My husband and I would often do spin classes together. And before that, we loved hiking. We went out to Colorado, did these big giant hikes, and we just loved the outdoors and doing things that were quite physically challenging. And that was something we enjoyed together. It was a no-brainer for me that I was going to have a natural birth, even though I didn't really know much about it. I didn't really know how to go about that, and I didn't really study, okay? And I think that's not a good idea, obviously, in hindsight. I was willfully ignorant. Let's face it. I think I had a kind of a certain type of arrogance to think I'm just going to walk in there and do my thing without really knowing what I might be up against. And not to say that labor in and of itself, but just in terms of the forces of the institution in which you choose to give birth in, right? I didn't really have that sense for, you might run into some trouble here because it's not that simple, right? It's not that simple when you're looking at, yeah, the whole medical system too. So I learned the hard way because although I did, I hired a doula to assist us at home because my goal was to stay at home for as long as possible. And she was extremely helpful in that sense. But there were a lot of things that I think in hindsight, again, yeah, I just know so much more now. I wish that all the years of knowledge and everything that I've learned over the years and sometimes you wish you could go back in time, right? But you can't. You can't go back in time and change the things. It's just how it is. And truly, the experience um, is what put me on this path. It is why I feel so passionate about birth and educating families about their own bodies, about the birth process, about what their choices are. Yeah, I didn't have a good experience. And I don't know, we don't have forever to get into all the nitty-gritty, but some of the details of the birth could be illustrative in terms of what do people face. And the thing that's amazing to me is that there is so much available now at your fingertips in terms of information. It is so easy to just look certain things up and watch videos, and connect with people in a way that wasn't as readily available in 2004 or 2003 rather. You had to go do your research, get the books, right? And try to find the people that um, might resonate with like what you want. It's so much easier now. So I can get into the story a little bit if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might be a good just to kind of circle back on the idea of choices, and I think that's something that with me, I'm very happy that I took your class before the process of even trying to have a child, before I had to navigate any of these choices, because I think had I not had my eyes and mind open to alternative approaches to giving birth than just the standard, okay, you just go to the hospital when you get into labor. I think that was just the only choice that I thought existed. I knew it like something kind of felt off about it. Just like, for what the entire evolution of humanity, people didn't need to go to hospitals. So like, why is it that we need to go to hospitals now? It seems like it's all very intense and maybe overly medicalized in a lot of different ways. So I think that it's been beneficial for me to just understand some of these other paths that do exist. And of course, the hospital system is there for a reason, and for high risk deliveries and for mothers that maybe have medical complications that would benefit from interventions and things like that. But for your 51% of the births, you would hope or assume that you can go through a more natural process. And I mean, maybe part of it as well is like this kind of social and cultural expectation of that's just how we do things here. And you're going back to the Stone Age if you want to deliver naturally. And why would you ever want to do that? Maybe you can kind of just talk about at a high level some of the benefits or physiological advantages or maybe outcomes. Like you're kind of mentioning better outcomes in certain areas than others. I'm assuming that means as a good outcome would be a healthy baby, a healthy mother. What are maybe some of the reasons why in the past people would need to go to a hospital versus having the option to do a natural or even like a free birth? What are the things that they consider there?
Yeah, I think maybe I can sum up a very brief history so that we have some understanding of how did we end up in this situation where so many women are being told they need to have this, that, and the other. I think again, it's going to be complicated and it's obviously multifaceted. I had a client that said his grandmother had 17 children. 17. And
Whoa.
no no
Whoa.
twins, no twins, and they were all born.
Small army.
Yeah, they were all born naturally, no complications in the South, born at home. Yeah, that's amazing, right? But that was pretty like commonplace for families to be a lot bigger than they are now, right? People typically had 6 or 7 children or more, and that was not considered like abnormal like today, right? And did bad things happen in times where we didn't have all of this technology? Yeah, I'm sure. Absolutely. But was it so incredibly dangerous? I don't think we have proof of that. And certainly we wouldn't have, like you said, been able to populate the planet in the way that we have if that had been the true story of birth, right? One of my mentors frequently talks about that and says the forest isn't covered with dead primates, right? So, why and how are we so different? We're not really in terms of the physiologic mechanism. Things have definitely gotten more complicated just as modern life has made things more complicated in all ways, right? But what I like to teach about is the physiology of birth. Like, let's understand what is actually happening from a biological perspective. And obviously as humans and as biology is so complicated, right? And it's so nuanced because there are so many factors that can change our physiology. And now we kind of understand these things in a different way, which I think is really cool because you might know it intuitively, but we've got the research to support what we know intuitively to be true, right? That how we feel is going to affect our physical being, right?
Mm.
If we're feeling fear, what does the body do? The body contracts, it constricts, right? So there's an actual like going in on yourself. But when we're feeling relaxed and groovy, like the body is like loose and open, right?
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that point really quickly because I think that made something click in my mind when you described that during the class. Okay, imagine you're using the restroom and you're going number two and you close the door. You have privacy and it's easier to go if you are relaxed. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, everyone could probably agree to that one. If you are giving birth, it's sort of a similar process where there's diaphragms and muscles and things that need to be, you're saying, loose and flowing in order to facilitate an easier experience giving birth. And then with that in mind, is okay, what kind of situation would I feel comfortable in and relaxed? Is it being in a hospital room under super bright blue light fluorescence with a bunch of strangers and then you're on your back and your legs are up in stirrups and you're getting yelled at to push? That sounds like the exact opposite of something that would be relaxing and facilitate a smooth process. So I think that's really something that just kind of hit home for me. It's, oh, you want to cultivate an environment in which the mother is comfortable so that then the process is able to unfold in a more easeful way.
Yes, absolutely. And that example illustrates the law of the sphincters, right? Ina May Gaskin, in her book Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, outlines the law of the sphincters, which is a way of explaining how sphincters work. So sphincters are openings in the body that are supported by a group of muscles, and the sphincter opens when the muscles release, and usually sphincters release when certain conditions are present, right? Which is privacy, not being hurried or rushed, and undisturbed. So, yeah, like you say, most of us, we don't go to the bathroom out in the open, right? We shut the door and we have the privacy, and that makes sense to us. Like we know why, we don't think about it too much. As far as like how did it come to be that we have this image of birth as something that occurs under bright lights with a woman on her back and people holding her legs and yelling at her to push, like, yeah, that was never the case and still isn't really the case for people choosing certain settings to give birth in. And also, if we look at indigenous populations, and still today this exists, we still have pockets of communities who maintain the way that they've always done it, right? Like they have maybe attendants, but they're not necessarily medically trained, but they are women who they trust them, they have a relationship with them, and they are women who have attended others in their community. So that still exists. And there is still a percentage of women, even in industrialized countries, who are making the choice to not go down the medicalized path, which is what we know and what we believe to be like the safest, right? Like that is
Mm.
the safest. But the numbers show that that's not necessarily true. So I can tell you just from having worked with a lot of different families and a lot of different women that for some families, like it's a non negotiable. They're having their baby in a hospital. That is like not something that they are interested in entertaining for a moment. They feel more comfortable, more solid giving birth where there are, high level NICU nearby and medical providers. So you've got that one end of the spectrum of people that I've personally worked with and come into contact with. And then you have at the opposite end of the spectrum, people who do not want to engage with that at all. And because they don't want what's on offer there. They truly trust that all will be well, right? And if it's not going to be good, they know that they either can transfer to a medical facility or if something unexpected happens, for example, like if a baby should die, which is obviously the worst thing for a family, but they've already contemplated what they would do in that situation. They've thought it through, in other words.
Mhm.
That's a really wide range. And then I've worked with a lot of people who are having second babies, third babies, and maybe they want to do things differently for their second time, for their third time, and they might choose differently. And it's a long process of self exploration, like really getting to know yourself, getting to know your values, getting to know like what is really important to you, coming up against some really big fears that you have as you navigate this landscape. And then once, for example, the mother knows what she wants and how she's going to go about it, she might, you know, have to then negotiate those desires with her partner who may not be
Mhm.
fully on board with what she's trying to go for. So when I'm educating my clients or people that come to me, like, I'm just laying it out there. I'm just saying, here's what it is. I had a father who was like data analytics. Okay. And the mother really wanted to have a home birth. She did not, they both shared with me their experience of their hospital experience the first time. And it was really traumatic for them. And they knew they didn't want that again. They were certain. They were like, we definitely don't want that. We don't really know about the other option, right? But it was a process of, okay, well, what could we do? What could we possibly do? And we talked through all of it. And in the end, they did decide to have their baby at home. I found them a traditional midwife, someone who actually was very connected to the indigenous community And they were comfortable with that. They were comfortable, mostly the mother felt like she really wanted me to both mostly be at her side. And then, for the midwife to come at the end, just to ease the dad's concerns and worries about not making, having someone who does have medical and clinical expertise to be on standby. But I just showed him the numbers and that was enough for him. He really showed up in an amazing way because he knew that this could be an absolutely life-changing experience, totally elevate this family in a way that the devastation that they experienced in the hospital with their first baby, she knew she never wanted to do that again. She was like, absolutely not. I'm not going back there. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to have them put their fingers inside of me or just tell me that I have to have a C-section when I know that I am designed and I am built for this and I am made for this. And she did. And she had her baby in the water and it was incredible. But she knew that that was not on offer. And we really need to remember that we're in charge of our bodies. We really are. We need to stop asking for permission. All right. I think that there is too much of that. And that's one thing that I really had to learn for myself too. When it came time for me to have my second baby, I was like, I'm in the driver's seat this time.
Mhm.
I'm the boss. I'm going to say what I want and what I don't want. And I realize that a lot of these things that are in place are just hospital policy. I don't work for this hospital. Like, why should I carry out your thing that you need to do because the lawyer on the other end said you need to do that? No, like that's not what I'm doing. Sorry, thank you. So I had to learn that. Really, I had to really find my voice. And part of that came from the inquiry. So I really had to look back at my own first experience and understand, like, wait a minute, what happened? Why did that happen? I'm not okay with this. This doesn't feel right. This isn't right. This was not how it was meant to be. And there was a consequence, a really big consequence that I was just not okay with. I'm not going to accept that postpartum depression is just a normal thing that happens after you give birth.
Right.
Not necessarily. You don't really hear about that as being prevalent in indigenous communities, right? The woman gets a lot of support postpartum. Yes, your hormones are all over the place. Yes, you're more emotional. Certainly, it's a big, massive change. This is the hero's journey, right? You are going into the underworld and you will emerge stronger having had that experience, but it's not a given that you should be traumatized and feel less capable. You should emerge feeling more capable than ever. That is in fact the biology. That is in fact the design, to feel
Mm.
on top of the world and really tuned into your baby, because your baby is energetically and physically connected to you for the next however many years, but certainly the first 2 years, right? And that is when the most development occurs. And that's when the attachment and with the mother and the baby and the bonding occurs. And that has lifelong consequences. So it's it's imperative that we get absolutely all the information we can ahead of time, come up with a plan, decide who you want there, make sure that you've discussed your plans with the people that you are inviting into your space, and
Mhm.
make sure that you keep the people out that you don't want there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's been one of the maybe more surprising things going through the process with Brittany being pregnant is just the fear that seems to surround the whole thing. I didn't expect to have such strong reactions from friends and family when I mentioned, oh, yeah, we're exploring other possibilities to give birth outside of a hospital, whether that be at a birthing center or at home. People started freaking out. I was just like, why are you freaking out so intensely? And I don't know if it's that their own personal experiences or their perceptions were just so strong that they felt they needed to forewarn me and my wife to try to influence and sway our decision making one way or the other. But it almost seemed like we were being ostracized for even considering any other alternatives, which then made me almost more adamant of really seeing like why are these reactions so strong? What is the benefit of going to a hospital? What are the benefits of a more natural process? And I think that's another thing that also surprised me. I was like, on the more natural path, there are these benefits or experiences like hormonal, chemical, these bonds that build between the mother and the child that seem to be only available if it's a natural process where the baby is birthed through through the birth canal, and like the whole microbiome transfer that happens there, and then the skin to skin contact, and then the heartbeat like entrainment or like synchronization or whatever it is that happens there, and then obviously the breastfeeding that comes immediately afterward, and just this bond and the oxytocin that they mentioned. Obviously, we haven't gone through the process yet. This is all kind of just what I've been kind of hearing about and trying to learn more about. But it just seems like there's so many benefits to at least trying to have the natural process that it's worth digging. And it's my wife that's digging for the courage to face up to those fears, to give herself and our child the possibility and the opportunity to gain all of those benefits. And I just think that it's unfortunate that there aren't really that many conversations around that truth, that there's very real differences between the two approaches. And I don't think that there's as much weighing of the pros and the cons of either side. It's just kind of like, oh, so I'm going to outsource this whole process to somebody else because they're a medical professional and they know what's best for me. And I think that the assumption that they might know what's best for you, but whether or not they act upon that in your best interest is a huge question mark. And the documentary that you had recommended, we watched before the class, The Business of Being Born, the title kind of sums it up. There's a lot that they go into, but it is a business when it comes down to it, of this medical procedure. They're able to bill in the tens of thousands of dollars for this thing. So once you have financial incentives starting to dictate decision making on how you're going to give birth to your child, I think that really skews a lot of how people are presenting these choices or potential options that you may have. And so I think that's just like one of the biggest things that you're mentioning, creating the space, being very intentional with who you're including in your plan. That's one thing that I wasn't anticipating having to remove myself from certain people, to not even share our plans with them, just knowing the types of reactions that I either got initially or was anticipating getting, is kind of closing down the circle a little bit, just to be able to feel confident in our own decision making.
That is a
Yeah.
very good idea. And I'll explain why in terms of, you touched on it a little bit in terms of the oxytocin and the hormones that are involved in birth. But yeah, isn't that amazing? There's so much fear, and really it's almost something that people, bond on, right? And maybe they have been traumatized, maybe they have had traumatic experiences, versus getting curious about, that's so cool. What do you know about that? Tell me more. So yeah. But when we are in labor, and forget about when we even are in labor, but getting towards that window opening up, we do go into a different brain state. Our brain waves change as the estrogen and progesterone increase, and particularly the estrogen receptors in the mother's uterus begin to increase. The part of her brain that's most activated is, in order for her to be able to release and actually go into labor on her own, is her primal brain, her mammalian brain. It's deep inside your brain, and it's the part of your brain that releases the oxytocin, which causes the uterine contractions. And that, incidentally, that part of your brain, your pituitary gland, like we talk about that in yoga a lot too, like your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland, and the headstand stimulating your pituitary gland to create sort of altered states of consciousness. And that is very much what is happening when you are in labor. That part of your brain is lit up, and the part that is logical and thinking brain, the part of your brain that makes it possible for you and I to communicate and have this conversation, is in the background. The foreground is your primal brain, your instinctive brain. It's not your rational thinking brain where you're making calculations and checking off your to-do list. So in order for that part of your brain to really be optimized, you do kind of have to shut out the rest of the world. And especially now, right, with phones and people having access to communicating with you any time of the day, whether you like it or not, is very stimulating and stimulates the part of your brain that creates stress. And stress and labor do not go hand in hand. So yeah, you do need to maybe completely shut the phone down and put it in a suitcase somewhere and don't look at it, because you want to engage in activity that is relaxing, which whether it's like taking a walk, going in the woods, baking, um, cooking. I mean, cleaning your house can be very relaxing. You know, you hear about people nesting and such, connecting with your partner, making love, all of those things will help turn on that part of your brain.
Mm.
Um, so in essence, we do have to be very intentional of how we're going to move into the process. But then, of course, it's like, well, what happens next, right? What about the we don't know. We've never been to labor land before. And you really are in an altered state and you have to stay in that state. So I feel like the best way to support someone too is to know that this is the flow state and this builds and builds and builds and builds until it's time for your baby to be born, because your baby is moving down through your pelvis with these surges, with these contractions, moving down, and that can take time. And it's not linear. And we really cannot
Mm.
impose linear thinking onto a very cyclical model of life, right? Like women are cyclical. We're not linear. So the whole concept of even like timelines and deadlines is linear. And that's why
Yeah.
you hear about so many people saying, well, I needed to be induced, or I didn't go into labor on my own, or I took too long, or I never got past a certain why. So, yeah, and you are more comfortable, generally speaking, in your own environment where you feel familiar. The bedroom, right? Your bathroom or your bathtub. These are places where you are used to letting go. We don't have to sanitize the bedroom, but
Mm.
we did have to sanitize, you know, a hospital experience, obviously, because birth is very sexual, right? So as soon as I alluded to like getting into a history of birth, but like there was a time where men were not involved in the birth process. And well, they had a very important role, a very particular role, which was to guard the perimeter, keep the
Mm.
barbarians or the wild animals out, tend to the fire, or making sure there was enough food and that the couple that was conceiving got the best food, because they know how important that is for growing a healthy child. They made sure that the men and the women who were starting a family, so not just the woman, but the father, it's particularly important for him to get good nutrition. So, yeah, that was the rule. They weren't
Mm.
necessarily present at the birth. Again, we can only know what we know based on artifacts, things that were like written down, depictions, and it even like the earliest depictions of women in labor and birth, whether it was Cleopatra or someone in rural Scotland or something like that, they were generally in an upright position and maybe squatting or supported either by someone or something, like hanging from a ceiling or like a tree, grabbing onto something and then bearing down, right? That makes sense, right? That
Right.
makes sense because it
Use gravity.
yeah, gravity. How is the pelvis most open, most advantageous for the baby to wriggle its way through and make its way down? So yeah, we were sold a bit of a lie to say that you need all these things, or this is dangerous, or you should be afraid. No, why? But I mean, that comes down to like the idea of like, are you afraid of your own body? Right. So this is a
Mm.
value. This is a value system. Like, what do you value? Are you afraid? Because it's a cliche to say it's a journey, but it really is. And everybody is at a different place. And when I look back at my own experience, where was my consciousness around birth when I was ready to have my first baby? Where was my consciousness when I was ready to have my second baby? I was in a completely different place. And
Mhm.
and then 20 years later, where am I now? I'm in a completely different place. I have a completely different relationship to my own body and the choices I make for myself. So it's going to be very individual. And I think it's very hard to do anything individual on a system wide anything, right? So, like,
Right.
what I do is very personal. It's very vulnerable. The clients that I've had, like, we form deep connections and relationship that often, not always, but often last for many years. Like I am still, and I consider them, my friends, and they have awakened things in me. And the support that I was able to provide, I feel so much gratitude that they trusted me to be in that space. But yes, so there is a great level of responsibility and also that, and especially because this is such a vulnerable time, right? And
Mhm.
so in our yoga training, we talk about the nervous system, we talk about polyvagal theory, we talk about all these things like if you're working on your own nervous system, you're in training yourself to be able to tap into your parasympathetic and not be in fight or flight. And sometimes fight or flight is appropriate and necessary for survival. But if there are people around you that are complete nervous wrecks all the time, clearly you don't want them in your birth space.
Right. No, definitely good good advice. And I'm sure we could continue to unpack. I would love to continue the conversation. Obviously, I'm going through this process myself now, so maybe as we're getting closer or after the birth can have you back on the show for another check-in, how our experience went. But wanted to give you the opportunity to tell the audience where they can find you or they can connect resources or any classes you have coming up.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I would absolutely love that. It would be such an honor. And I really wish for you and Brittany to have an peaceful, expansive, amazing birth experience. And I'm definitely here
Great,
for you.
thank you.
And I'm here for
Appreciate
anyone,
that.
really, whether it's pre or post. They can come to Shakti Yoga and take my prenatal yoga class every Saturday at 12:30. Every other month, I do the labor and delivery workshop at Shakti. I would rather call that class your sacred birth ceremony because I think that would be more appropriate, but it is what gets people in the door. It's an alternative to a hospital based class. But I also work with families individually, whether it's preparing for your upcoming birth or attending your birth or doing something as simple as birth sling session, which I absolutely love, which is really to just get the body ready and open and relaxed and ready to make your birth experience pleasurable and to invite your baby into your arms undisturbed. So we need to work on that. We have to be thinking about that ahead of time. We have to be super intentional about how we're going to go about getting that.
Yeah, super grateful for the perspective that you've given me. And I'm sure there's countless other folks that you've opened their eyes to the benefits and just some of the other choices that we have and being able to kind of step into our own power and sovereignty around these topics. So grateful for the work that you do and the help that you've given me thus far. Appreciate your time coming on the show today. Any last words you want to leave the audience with?
Trust yourself first and foremost. And yeah, I would say trust yourself.
Perfect. Excellent. So thank you so much again, Iris, for coming on the show. Thanks everybody for listening.